Welcome to OkState Daily. Casey Porter here. So glad that you decided to tune in. Joined as I am each and every baseball podcast by Robbie Rainwater. Coach, I'm not going to lie, man, OSU was playing great coming in. This weekend was disappointing for me. I was hoping that they would win more than 1 out of 3. I'm super glad they showed the grit to come back Sunday, had the big game on Sunday, but that Friday game, that was really another gut punch that this team has taken because they came out and played well. Texas just kept answering. But I was hoping for more than 1 out of 3 this weekend.
Yeah, like you said, disappointing weekend. And, and going back and looking at it, reminds you a lot of the Kansas State series.
Yes.
And how it played out and going into, talking about games 1 and 2, kind of like we did with Kansas State, in that you've got the lead or tied going into the bottom of the 7th and can't hold on, and so and going back to the same things that we talked about during the Kansas State series and it happened against our best, right? And it's played out the last 3 or 4 series how important that Friday game is, and you've got Garcia starting the game, and then you bring in Molsky and Ure and Kranz, and we don't get it done. And those, who else do you throw out there? You know what I mean? That's So tip your hat to the Longhorns and getting it done. And not only that, but a gut punch by a kid named Gasparino hitting a home run, right? Yep. And so it just kind of all around that Friday game was kind of, like you said, a gut punch that carries over to the next game sometimes and have a little hangover. But that's the one thing that really stood out to me with this series is how that mirrored this last weekend, how it mirrored the Kansas State series, in that we've got the lead going into late innings and we throw our best out there and don't come away with a victory. So hopefully we can get that turned around and heading towards the postseason and have a little bit more success and maybe, get into that groove that we've talked about where our offense and pitching staff is hot at the same time.
I think what I'm getting ready to say has both positives and negatives to it. It seems like this team has struggled on the road. They played really good at home. I think the big positives of that is that OkState Stadium is finally breaking in. We're figuring out how it works as a good home field advantage, and the kids are really starting to play towards wanting to be at home at OkState in front of the wonderful Oklahoma State fans. And then also I think the Cowboys are probably going to host the regional, probably won't host a super regional. So if you struggle on the road, play good at home, I think that's a good thing that OkState is breaking in as a home field advantage. It's a good thing that you're probably going to host a regional, or at least you're in line to. Not a good thing in the sense that you're probably going to have to go on the road to win a super regional against a team like we saw this last weekend.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because that's one of the things I wrote down as something to talk about is having only won one road series in Big 12 play, right? And that took an extra innings game against West Virginia, right? And so of the top 5 teams in the Big 12 standings right now, OSU is the only team with a losing record on the road in Big 12 play. And so that goes to what you were talking about is, good and bad in that, hopefully if we can, finish the season in the last 2 series the way we should and perform well in the Big 12 tournament, that hopefully we can host a regional and have some success there. But we're going to have to turn things around and figure out a different approach or whatever the case is. Try and find that little, niche that is the hang up on the road for the Pokes. And so,
what do you think it is? Just your evaluation of what you see, man. Well, is it just bad luck? Is it, the other team's the home team? What is it here?
Yeah, I think out of the however many teams are in the Big 12, and you've only got 4 teams in the Big 12 that have a winning record on the road. So it's a huge testament to home field advantage, right? No matter if it's OSU or any of the other teams. And so, when you're talking about only a third of the teams in your conference or less than a third of the teams in your conference that actually have a winning record on the road, it speaks volumes to home field advantage, and I don't know the travel schedules and all that kind of stuff, and that, the coaches have noticed and tried to make some tweaks there, but I don't think it's anything that OSU is or isn't doing. I think it's just, that's how important home field advantage is. That's how important it is to, speaking to hosting a regional, how important that is and how much the comfort and the routine. And, I'm a big routine guy, whether it's, in athletics or in personal life, whatever the case is. And there's nothing routine about going on the road and playing somewhere else. Right.
Yeah,
and,
right.
So anyway, I think that
especially for young kids, because they've never done it before.
Right. Yeah. And it's just kind of glaring. It makes you wonder, and maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's not, but, we've talked about this year about how good a pitching staff that we have, right? Whether it's our starting pitchers or it's our bullpen. And it's kind of, it kind of makes the wheels turn and make you think a little bit of, why is our bullpen struggling a little bit more on the road than maybe they do at home, And so I don't know that it's anything that OSU is doing or not doing. I think it just home field advantage is that important.
Yeah, either that or maybe at home they already have a 17-0 lead like we saw last Tuesday where they hit 10 home runs. And, hey, that just goes to the slim margins we've talked about with every team in college baseball. There are no 1980s Oklahoma State baseball. I know I hear that all the time. Well, Gary Ward would have done this. Gary Ward would have done that.
Yeah.
Guys, listen, okay? Gary Ward had the same record against the Texas teams, whatever. He didn't have to play him back in the old Big 8, right? The college baseball is different. Gary Ward would struggle way more in today's college environment, as awesome as he was. I don't mean that in a slight to him in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying to explain how much different college baseball is today and how much smaller the margins are. It goes to show you may be 2 pitches away from beating K-State and Texas, and this whole thing looking totally different, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just college baseball. I think it's baseball in general is different, right? And you're talking about, the 1980s was 40 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And that, the baseballs are different, the bats are different, the velocity that pitchers are pitching is different. I mean, very rarely do you see somebody go to the mound throwing 86, 87 miles an hour anymore, and when I was, in high school playing baseball or in college playing baseball, you had the Greg Maddoxes of the world and Tom Glavins and those type of guys who very rarely broke 90. And now everybody in college is throwing 92 plus, and so the whole game is different, right? Yeah. The stadiums are different, the baseballs are different, the bats are different, the philosophies are different, the analytics are different. It's just a totally different ballgame. So it's not fair to compare those. I mean, obviously, anytime you talk about OSU baseball, one of the first names that's going to come up is Gary Ward, right? Yeah. And still being around the program and sitting in the stands or wherever watching baseball. So, but yeah, there's no comparison. There's no 1980s baseball anymore being played. And like we've talked about in the past, the parity is much different, and in order to get to the College World Series, just the entire playoff format is completely different. Even the College World Series format is different. So there's nothing the same about, or I shouldn't say there's nothing the same, but there's very little that is the same about Division I baseball now as it was 40 years ago. So yeah, I just what that has to do with anything, I don't know, but it is very glaring that this weekend of how important the home field advantage is, right? And is it a concern? Is it not a concern that we've had 2 of our last 3 series that really mirrored each other and that we have the lead going into late innings and we're not able to shut the door when we're throwing our best guys out there, right? And that has been something that we've talked about over and over and over and over again in this podcast of how good it is and how much reassurance that bullpen has provided this team throughout the year of being able to insert a multitude of guys and them go in and slam the door. And it just hasn't worked out against Kansas State or against the Longhorns this last weekend. But there's obviously still time. It's not something that people should be concerned about. You got 2 more series. You go on the road to play, or you got Texas Tech at home, and then you go on the road to play Houston, and ought to be able to get some confidence back. And not having any more midweek games may provide some rest for those guys too, right? And so maybe that has something to do with it of, freshening up your bullpen without having those midweek games. So anyway, I still think that, OSU has a great chance to host if they finish up the year like they're supposed to, and they have a good showing in the Big 12 tournament, and go in and make some noise and see what happens.
So I guess I'm probably using this podcast as therapy for me because I just came away from this weekend very just kind of frustrated with the way it went. Because I'll say this, maybe this is the homerism in me. Maybe this is just because I love OSU baseball too much and I'm just blinded by it. But I came out of this weekend I'm feeling like Oklahoma State had a better roster than Texas up and down the roster. Better offense. They had just as good a pitching. I just came out of feeling like Oklahoma State was the better team and didn't win the 2 out of the 3. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's just kind of how I felt.
Well, and I think for me, and I'm going to assume it's the same way for you, is, the excitement that we talked about in the last podcast going into this series that OSU's in control now of their own destiny, right? Yes. We're not relying on somebody else. We're not needing this team to beat that team in order to have a chance. I mean, we had it by the throat and go take control of it, and it just didn't happen, right? That's one. The second part of that is seeing who's at the top, right? That bothers the crap out of anybody, fan, right? In that we've taken a stranglehold over, the majority of the season and performed very well, and we're sitting in a 3-way tie for second, but not able to go out and get it done against the Longhorns this weekend, and then seeing who still remains at the top is very bothersome. But give them credit. I mean, go look at their road record, right, versus their home. They're the complete opposite. I think they're like 10-2 on the road in Big 12 play. So anyway, that plays a lot into it. But for me, it was just the excitement of going into, like we ended the last podcast by saying, 2 blue blood programs going at it. OSU, the 2 programs that are sitting at the top of college baseball record books, right? And whether you're talking about appearances in the postseason, College World Series appearances, individual records, players of the decade or players of the century, whatever the case is. And you had those 2 programs going at it, and OSU was in control of their own destiny and just didn't get it done. And but that's a game of baseball. That's the way it works. And so, but happy to see them still sitting towards the top in a 3-way tie for second, and not indicative of what you can expect down the road. But I do think that not having any more midweek games gives our bullpen some rest and some time to freshen up and maybe be a little bit more fresh for the last 2 series and going into the postseason.
All right, let me pull myself up by the bootstraps. Let me get over my pity party here, and let's move on, right? Hey, I thought it was interesting last weekend. You brought up, hey, is this Carson Benge thing? Did he throw the first game because he's going to now be the first starter, whether it be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Or was it in that order because you mentioned the routine part of it? You love routine because they wanted to keep both Sam Garcia and Brian Holiday in the same routine, both on Friday and Saturday. We got that question answered. We saw Carson Benge throw on Sunday to keep that routine the same. I thought that was fantastic.
Yep, and I think I kind of misspoke because, with the series starting on a different day last week and all that kind of stuff, I said Friday, but the point was, did Benge throw the first game to keep Garcia and Holiday in the routine of throwing on Friday, Saturday? So I think, like you said, we got the answer to that, and seeing that. Here's the other side of that coin: is it don't matter if you throw Benge in game 1 or game 3. Right. I mean, he goes out there and produces and shuts the door on the Longhorns and throws very well and does his thing at the plate too, and so it's just, he just continues to impress on either side of the ball, right, or either side of the white line of what he's capable of doing. And again, it's no secret why he's regarded as one of the top 2-way players in the country, right? And so I think that's just a huge testament to Carson Benge and the workload that the coaching staff has put on him, and the expectation for him to produce, and him carrying this team on his shoulders offensively, and them having the confidence that it doesn't matter if we throw him in a closing role, it doesn't matter if we throw him in game 1 of a series, it doesn't matter if we throw him in game 3 of the series, he's going to produce. And so just very, very impressive from a young man that no matter what is asked of him to do, he does it, and he does it in a very successful fashion, and it's fun to watch. And I think that we're gonna know here very soon, meaning next spring, how important he was to this team and vital that he was to this team, and how much he's going to be missed if he does decide to go into professional baseball ranks and that sort of thing. But just very impressive young man.
6 2/3 innings, gave up just 1 run, struck out 5. His ERA on the year is 2.45, and he's hitting .332 at the plate. Nolan Schubert had one of those weekends, man. He's a premier college baseball player. He hits the home run that even the Keith Moreland and Greg Swindell, both obviously played in the major leagues. They were the ones doing the broadcast on the Longhorn Network, and we hit it. They both went, "Oh my God, wow!" I mean, he has that kind of just Babe Ruthian type of power, right? So he hits all these home runs, he gets all these hits, and then he also struck out in some big situations, misplays the ball, 2 balls in left field. So, man, you mentioned Nolan Schubert, he's still just in the middle of his season in terms of the amount of games that he's played, and even less than that. As far, whenever you say that, you kind of mean offensively. Hey, getting in the groove at the plate, get your timing back. You don't think sometimes defensively getting, those margins, getting those jumps off the bat and that kind of thing. You kind of saw that this weekend with him. It was that roller coaster for him, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And, I've talked about this. You and I have talked about this in the past, coaching together and things like that. But, I don't think the average fan, right, or even maybe people that have played the sport, I don't think they truly understand there is a difference between moving to your glove side and moving to your throwing side, right? Mm-hmm. And there are some people, there are some kids, most of them, right, that are better one way or the other, right? And being able to put those guys in position where I open up better and run better to my glove side versus my throwing side is the difference between sometimes playing left field and right field, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the difference between playing second base and shortstop. And so that combined with, there is no substitute. You talk about football, there's no preparing for speed, right? You can't simulate speed in practice, right? Especially at the high school level. The same thing in baseball. You can't simulate a curve ball coming off a aluminum bat that is slicing away from you when the wind's blowing, whatever the elements is, and talking about the different drills that you do as an outfielder, do you open up to your glove side or when do you open up to your throwing side when the ball is hit, right? If I got a left-hander up and he hits a ball to left field, I probably need to open up to the foul line because that ball's going to be slicing away from me. So you can't simulate those things just by hitting fungo or sticking one in a pitching machine and taking fly balls. So, like you're saying, and what we mentioned last week is he's just now getting really into the mid part of his season with the time that he missed. It's going to take a few of those balls for him to get back in the groove in the outfield. So anyway, those are all things that come with, you don't say a lack of experience, but a lack of experience this year in the outfield just because of the time he's missed. And a lot of that time he's been in a DH role. So, but I don't think that's anything to be concerned about. And if it is, and we've got somebody better defensively, that's what the DH spot is for.
Yep, absolutely. How good has Nolan Schubert been? How about an 8-game hit streak? He's had 5 multi-hit games in that 8-game hit streak, and he's 18 for his last 32. I giggle when I say this. It's just video game numbers. 563, 20 RBIs, 12 extra base hits. Dude's been an absolute wrecking ball at the plate. Hey, Colin Brigham had a good weekend at the plate, too. He had a home run. He drove in 5 runs in the Sunday game, or 4 of them were in the victory on Sunday. He's all the way up to 296 on the year, OPS 921, 13 home runs, 36 RBIs. So Colin Brigham had a good week. Hey, and going back to the UCF series on the road, too, 3 times the Cowboys have had their backs against the wall coming into the Sunday game, right? And 3 times they've had that gut punch. 3 times they've responded. So a lot of times in playoff baseball, it's how do you handle elimination, right? Am I being a little bit too tinfoilish to say, hey, this team is kind of in a way faced elimination on 3 different occasions, knowing they really needed to win that Sunday game, and they came out and played their best game of the week. Under those circumstances, is that too tinfoilish?
No, I mean, I think it goes back to all the things that we've talked about all year and the resiliency of this team and how the coaching staff does a great job preparing those guys, and not only preparing those guys on a daily basis, but helping them move on and letting it go, right?
Yes.
Let it go, and because short memory, right? You talk about that a lot in baseball, is short memory. And the reason why you can have a short memory is because because tomorrow you're going to turn around and do it again, right? And like we talked about last podcast last week, is that can go one of two ways. If you don't let it go and you don't move on and you don't have short memory, that struggle is going to continue, right? And I think that's what we've talked about a lot, is how this coaching staff is very, very good at removing that mindset, helping them move on, letting it go, short memory, not to the point where we don't work on things that we need to fix, right? But you got to turn around and do it again tomorrow. And if you don't let it go, you're going to put yourself in a worse position at the end of Sunday than you were going into Friday. And so anyway, that going back to Nolan Schubert, we ended the last podcast, we started the last podcast of one of the things that we noticed was how Nolan Schubert was starting to get hot. He was squaring balls up. When's the last time you've seen him get jammed or hit one off the end of the bat? It's like he may swing and miss, but when he does hit it, he barrels it up and it's hit hard, and so very impressive to watch him. Here's something else that I noticed, and some things, and we've talked about this all year long too. If I told you that between Zach Earhart and Carson Benge and Nolan Schubert and Aiden Miola and Colin Brigham in a game combined, they hit 380, would you say we win or lose?
Yeah, win, definitely.
Okay. Well, that's what happened in game one.
Yeah, right.
But when you're talking about those other guys that we've talked about, the heartbeat of this team, the Colin Ritchies, the Ian Dohertys, the Avery Ortiz, Lane Forsythe, they went 2 for 13. Yeah. So I think that speaks testament again to what we have been talking about all year, and that how big a role these guys play, right? These guys that aren't your, prospects, a lot of it because of youth, right? Or some of it not because of youth, so just not, they're not 6'5" and 225 pounds, but when those guys struggle, it does a lot of times, right? The middle of your lineup and your prospects can't do enough to overcome that, right? And
it's too boom and bust. It's like you score 3 in one inning and then don't score for like 4 innings in a row when that happens.
Right. And so, those guys go 2 for 13 in game one, and the big boys, right, go 8 for 21, and we still get beat. And so I think that goes back to what we've talked about a lot, and how important those guys are to this team, and the role that they play, and the success that this ball club has when they're successful. And that's not a shot at anybody. That's just, again, a compliment to, and goes back to what we've talked about a lot. That's what's beautiful about college baseball to me, is that a lot of times, and I would say more times than not, your role players, or your guys that aren't high draft picks, or your guys that aren't high prospects, are just as successful and just as important to the team as the guys that are. And that really stuck out to me in game one because, we've talked a lot about, not necessarily recently, but the first half of the season, we've talked a lot about the strikeouts to walk ratio, or the strikeouts to hit ratio. There was no problem there this weekend, right? In game one, you have 7 strikeouts and you had 4 walks and 10 hits, right? And in game 2, you have only 4 strikeouts and 5 walks, right? And so that ratio is there that we've talked about as a concern at the first part of the season. That's kind of rectified itself, right?
It has.
But now we're talking about, how can we get in a groove with our bullpen again and closing the door when we take the lead or are tied in late innings? So anyway, that's something else that stuck out to me is just, again, to be able to mention those guys and how important they are to this team, regardless of how much success that the Benges and Schuberts and Miolas and those guys are having.
100%. Time to get on your boxing gloves, because it's getting ready to be a backyard brawl this weekend with Texas Tech. They're a great team to play, because at the end, they're just so competitive. At the end of it, you just feel like you're just exhausted, because they just play so hard and they hit the ball always, and they're so competitive. So hey, this is always a fun series with Texas Tech, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would say that regardless of what sport it is, that OSU and Texas Tech always have good games, right? Yes. And that they're very competitive games, regardless of what sport it is. So yeah, exciting series coming up this weekend, and hopefully get back on track and maybe close the gap in that in the top of the standings for the Big 12 and move on to Houston and see what happens in postseason.
All right, Coach. I appreciate you joining. It has been a lot of fun, and so hey, I want to thank everybody else for tuning into OkState Daily Podcast for the baseball side. So until next time, I want to thank you for tuning in and say, go Pokes.
Go Pokes.